Could we see a huge trade involving the Toronto Maple Leafs and forward William Nylander? Indications on the latest reports say the negotiations on a new contract have not gone well, and it could lead to that. We'll discuss that scenario, plus we have the latest updates on a potential Debrincat trade out of Ottawa. We have a bunch of signings, so we also have huge news in women's hockey, and a lot of RFA players did not get qualified today and are now joining the UFA side of the business. We'll discuss all the news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we do have a ton of news to cover today. First up, before we jump in, I just want to acknowledge one of our former NHL players retiring, and that's defenseman Marcus Nutivara, who played with Columbus, signed recently with San Jose, couldn't really get into action. I think he played one preseason game last year, having a lot of issues with his hips, and at the young age of 29 is leaving the game of hockey. So Nutivara will not be proceeding with his NHL career because of the medical issues he's been experiencing. So he's retired at a young age. As I mentioned as well, late last night, we had a huge update in the world of women's hockey. Sounds like the women's hockey are going to be getting a new league with, of course, if you follow that right now, there's basically two different entities. Once upon a time, there was it's changed a lot over the years. There was the Canadian Women's Hockey League. There was a league in the States. And then, of course, the Canadian League ended up folding. And now there's the PHF. And then there was a bunch of a lot which was unfortunately a lot of the top players did not want to play in that league. They had a lot of concerns, a lot of issues. And they formed the PWHPA, so the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association. So it's a unionized league where they kind of been playing on their own, doing kind of the dream tour, I guess you'd call it. That entity, with some backing, has now acquired the PHF. And they're going to be forming one new league. The NHL and Gary Bettman have always said they did not want to financially or otherwise assist women's hockey at a pro level until, while there were two different entities. Once they became one, where there was one league, that's when they would, more than help. So we'll see what this means. This could be the first step to many to creating a more sustainable, better paying league for women at the pro level that'll eventually, it's going to take a while to get to anything close to the NHL, of course, but it's the right step, the first step in the right direction here. So ultimately, there's going to be 6 teams in the beginning. Now, I know with the PHF, they've recently expanded teams. They've signed a lot of players. A lot of players have contracts, but apparently there's, in those PHF contracts, they even had what they called an at-will clause, which means that the teams could basically terminate them at any point. So they were not really ironclad contracts, nothing like the NHL where they're guaranteed at least a portion of the money. In the NHL you can be bought out, but there's still rules around that you're getting some of that money at the very least. Some players have recently signed contracts and gotten into either buying a new home or leasing a new home. And now all those contracts have been voided. All the PHF contracts are voided and they're starting fresh. But there's a lot of the reports, and I need more time to go through it all and kind of familiarize myself with a lot of the stuff that's been reported here in the last 24 hours. I mean, it's been a busy news cycle on the NHL side of things with the draft and free agency. I've been really focusing hard on a lot of content here, so haven't had time to be in a store with this story as I'd like to be, but certainly that league to me sounds like it was heading for bankruptcy anyways, and I think they were going to have a lot of issues. So ultimately, though, like I said, this is huge news for women's hockey. There's going to be some growing pains in the beginning, but it sounds like it's a big first step and the right step towards creating one pro league for women that's sustainable and will hopefully get support from the NHL and be able to grow like we see like the WNBA. Like it'll be hopefully be like the women's hockey version of that in the not too distant future. So we'll stay tuned for more updates on this developing story here over the summer, I'm sure. As I mentioned as well, there's a ton of players today that were restricted free agents who did not get a qualifying offer from their NHL clubs becoming a UFA now. So obviously the qualifying offers were due at 5 o'clock Eastern time today. Over the last couple of hours, a lot of the news is broken to who is not getting one. Now, some players we'd already kind of heard because teams were pretty transparent in talking with us and ahead of time. But a lot of these are somewhat surprising, and there's a lot of interesting names now out there. I'm just going to go through these. I'm not in any particular order, but Vancouver did not qualify Travis Dermott or Ethan Bear. Both of those defensemen are largely due to injuries. Dermott barely played last year. Bear certainly ran into issues at the World Championships, got injured. He's going to be out for a while. So they're both on the open market now. The Coyotes did not qualify Christian Fischer, which was very surprising. Fischer's been a real good soldier for them for some time. Not a huge name, not a big splash, like a big offensive dynamo or anything like that, but he's a real solid bottom six forward in my opinion, and has been a very supportive piece there. I know he's done a lot of, speaking when it comes to supporting the team when all the different adventures they've gone through to try to get the arena and just to kind of promote the game of hockey down there. So a little surprising there. There is a word they might try to re-sign him, but at a lower number. Keep in mind with some of these players, though, they're not necessarily not being qualified because the team completely wants to get rid of them. That's not the case with a lot of these players. What happens is some of these players, if they have arbitration rights, and that comes with a certain level of experience, that the team might not want to risk going to arbitration and losing. So they might want to look at it and be like, okay, either we don't like the amount we're going to have to pay you by going through this process, or we're concerned that if we go through arbitration, we're going to lose. So they don't qualify them. That avoids that process completely, but they can still negotiate a lower amount with them and see if they can sign them that way. And there is word that the Coyotes are interested in doing that with Fischer. Whether or not they come to terms, we'll have to wait and see. The Devils also, with Michael McLeod and Nathan Bastian, did not get a qualifying offer. They do apparently have interest to re-sign those guys as well. Again, at a smaller number, though. We'll see if that works out. Mackenzie Blackwood, goaltender, who was just traded from New Jersey to San Jose recently, he was non-qualified, so he will be on the open market, another goalie in the UFA world. The Sharks also did not qualify Noah Gregor as well. Rasmus Asplund, Cal Foote, a couple more names, Victor Mete in Toronto. Ryan Paling in Pittsburgh did not get a qualifying offer. Sam Steele and Mason Shaw in Minnesota. Morgan Geekie and Daniel Sprong did not go in with the Kraken. I'm really surprised at Sprong, but in a way I am and I'm not. I know it's tough to keep everybody in your lineup, but Sprong had a real good season, and they knew if he pushed it to arbitration, they would lose and have to pay him a hefty sum. So I think it's more of a case that they just don't want to go there. We'll see if they talk to either of these guys, but apparently some reporters were saying that Morgan Geekie's name was being mentioned a lot at the draft as available for trade. So it sounds like Geekie and Sprong are probably done in Seattle. Sprong will certainly become one of the more interesting names on the UFA market too, because he's very efficient. Not only did he do really well offensively and score a good amount of goals, he did so in a limited role, limited ice time. So I'm sure he'll have lots of interest. Jared Anderson-Dolan in LA, along with Zach McEwen, they did not get qualifying offers, so they will be UFAs. Tyson Jost in Buffalo, another one. In Anaheim, Max Comtois, we had talked about him before. Jesse Puljujarvi in Carolina, we talked about him as well. He just had a big surgery on double hip surgery, so he's going to be out sometime. I don't know what will happen there. Kevin Stenlund in Winnipeg, Dennis Gurianov in Montreal, Libor Hayek with the Rangers, and Evgeny Svechnikov, I believe the Sharks as well. None of those guys got qualifying offers either, so they will all be UFAs starting now. So we'll see tomorrow when free agency opens. They'll have a whole bunch of extra players joining that group. Now, as I mentioned, we do have some other signings today. We had Corey Perry. This actually came out last night, but we'd already put out the evening news video, so I will include it today. But Perry has signed with Chicago after being acquired by from Tampa, on a one-year deal of $4 million. So that's the same deal they gave Nick Foligno. So again, overpaying a veteran player to hit the cap floor for them, and it brings in an experienced player and somebody who's not afraid to play physical and can help not only mentor but protect Connor Bedard. I think that's a large part of their strategy here. The only thing with Perry and Foligno, when it gets to the trade deadline, for these guys to be moved, even at 50%, they're still going to have a $2 million salary. I don't know if they're going to end up getting moved. We'll see. Maybe they stay in Chicago, but at this stage of their careers, nobody's going to pay them that kind of money. So as much as Corey Perry has made a ton of money in his career, I think his career earnings are not far off from $100 million. Still, it's still hard to pass up that kind of money when most teams are probably going to offer you $1 million and another team offers you $4 million. That's interesting. I think that's why they're doing this here. The Edmonton Oilers did re-sign Matthias Janmark, 1 year, $1 million. So obviously he was a good defensive player for them, good penalty killer, and he'll be back with the Oilers. The Canucks announced today that young defenseman Noah Juleson has signed a 2-year extension at $775,000. The St. Louis Blues re-signed forward Tyler Tucker, a two-year deal at $800K. The Canes are re-signing Jesper Fast, 2 years around 2.4. That's another good bargain contract for Carolina after getting Jordan Salisbury on a good deal as well. So both those guys return, and for far less than they made before, which is great help for them. And Adin Hill and Vegas officially announced their deal. Finally, we'd heard probably about a week ago that Hill was going to be re-signing in Vegas for around $4.9 million, and that's the case. He gets 2 years at $4.9 from the Golden Knights. So certainly looks like right now they're going to go with a tandem of Adin Hill and Logan Thompson. Don't really know the status of Robert Leonard. Will he be an LTIR candidate for Vegas? Can he play? Is he healthy? Did he recover well from his surgeries? We don't know any of those details. We'll have to wait and find out here over time. But if he can't play, then obviously that'll help Vegas for another year or so, be able to go over the cap with the LTIR stuff. Now, recently bought out player Blake Wheeler from the formerly of the Winnipeg Jets. Looks like he's trying to head eastward for his next contract. I know based on comments between the player and his agent, it sounds like they would prefer to play the Eastern Conference to have just a little bit less travel and just a little bit easier when it comes to the time zone changes. Obviously, you know, when you're in the Western Conference, there's a lot that just with the geographically speaking, just the teams are spread out more. There's more travel, more time zone jumping. The Eastern Conference, you don't have as much of that. There's some talk that maybe he goes back to his roots and goes back to Boston where he started. I would say Florida makes a lot of sense as well. Apparently, he does have a Florida home, and of course has a good relationship with their head coach Paul Maurice. So that wouldn't be shocking either. But we'll see where Blake Wheeler ends up. Of course, earlier today at 1 o'clock Eastern, or noon Eastern time, 1 o'clock my time, we're in the Atlantic region, is when they announce all the buyouts, because that's when the waiver wire news activity comes out. And in case you missed it, Blake Wheeler, Matt Duchene of Nashville, Mike Riley of the Boston Bruins, and Kyler Yamamoto, formerly of Edmonton, now of Detroit, all were bought out today and are now unrestricted free agents. The latest on Alex Debrincat, Elliot Friedman, for the longest time was linking him to the Detroit Red Wings, and many reporters were saying that Detroit was the front runner to acquire the former 40-goal scorer, which I know a lot of Sens fans were crazy about, given the interdivisional relationship there, and the fact that it's tough, to put on such a good player on another team that you're not only in your division, but you're pretty well neck and neck with when it comes to, where your franchise is at. Ottawa, I think it's fair to say, very slightly ahead of Detroit when it comes to progressing at the end of their rebuild to try to compete for playoffs. Last year we saw Buffalo beat both of those teams by a little bit. Ottawa was in the middle, and then Detroit was in the bottom when it comes to those three in the standings. But you don't want to make Detroit better, ideally. Like this, it would be tough to do. I don't know if they could really do a trade there where both teams win on a short-term basis at the very least. So now Friedman saying that Detroit isn't really considered to be much in the mix, or at least not the favorites anymore. He's linking teams like the Anaheim Ducks, Washington Capitals, and New York Islanders as the main teams that are showing interest in kind of kicking tires on a potential trade. I think Islanders would have a real tough time getting this kind of deal done. I don't know what kind of offer they'd make. They'd have to offer a contract coming back that would be comparable to make the space. It sounds like Pierre Dorian as well is going to change from wanting a first-round pick in the 23 draft that's gone by. Instead of taking a future first-round pick, it sounds like his main intention now and goal is if he's going to trade Debrincat, he wants as close as possible, like a comparable player, like a roster player who can fill a second-line role and be productive and help them so they don't lose too much that's comparable. I mean, it's going to be hard to get somebody who's exactly comparable, but somebody who can step in and help immediately. So we'll see what those teams can offer. I know Anaheim and Washington have a couple of interesting players there, but hard to say. I think the toughest out of the three for them to make happen would be the New York Islanders, but time will tell. It'd be interesting to see where that goes. Now, with the William Nylander situation, it just sounds like to me, with all the reports that we're hearing, is that they're nowhere near close on a contract extension, and we're getting to the point that a trade might be something that this team ends up exploring. Now, the sad news here is that as of tomorrow, the Maple Leafs lose a lot of their leverage and flexibility here if they were going to make a move. Unless it happens tonight, which I would be shocked if it did, he has a modified no-trade clause that kicks in tomorrow. So clearly that's not going to be very helpful. So here's what's been going on. Pierre LeBrun, I know yesterday he was on First Up on Toronto Radio with Carlo Coliacovo and was talking. One of his quotes was that Nylander will not be back if the negotiations don't go smoothly. We know negotiations with Nylander in the past on his last contract were long, drawn out, very tough on both sides, and certainly would rate to the wire in near December, the December 1 deadline. And they don't want to go through that again. And secondly, like, for example, you heard Timo Meier have a quote the other day saying he wants to win and he understands that sometimes you have to take a little bit less money to make it work so you have the best chance to win as a team. And you just don't really hear that coming out of the top stars in Toronto. They want their market value. They want to be paid as much as they're worth and not a penny less. And that just seems to be the biggest concern when it comes to them and their careers, not so much putting the team together to win a Stanley Cup. I mean, a lot of fans would love to hear that the Matthews extension came in a little less than he left a little money on the table to make the team more flexible to win. I'm sure that would be a huge boost for the team. But is that going to happen? We don't know, and it's difficult to say. I know, for example, Timo Meier was making $8.8 million when Pierre LeBrun in his radio hit was asked if this Timo Meier contract would be used as a comparable. He said that Brad Treliving would probably like to use it as a comparable because it sounds like the Leafs definitely want to get Nylander under $9 million, like something in the 8s is where they would prefer to get him signed. And it sounds like he wants probably closer to 10 or better is what it sounds like from what we're hearing. Other reporters have said that they have to get Nylander at least like under 9.5. So okay, well, some are saying they want to get him under 9.5. Some are saying that they need to get him under 9 and into like the mid to high 8s. That's quite a range of money there as well. Still a big raise over what he's making right now, and it's still very comparable to what a lot of other players are earning. But the problem is he's not going to want to use the comparable of Timo Meier. Now he should, because look at what Timo Meier has done. But the problem is that they're going to use his own teammates. Like between him and Matthews and Marner, they're all going to be looking at each other, go, well, he makes that, he makes this. I'm just as good, or I'm just as productive, or what have you. And that's what they're going to do. And like I said, the history of negotiations here, it's not going well. Now, James Muriel also said the same sort of thing. He's hearing that you would think, he said that if they were anywhere close and they were making good progress, that you wouldn't be hearing this kind of stuff, right? You wouldn't be hearing that it's going to be a long, drawn-out, contentious negotiation. But obviously, that's not what we're hearing right now. So certainly, it's concerning. And he said if Nylander and his agent were looking for anything under 9.5, you would think that would allow them to be well on their way to having something close, so that when it turns July 1 tomorrow and they could sign it, even if it doesn't happen right away, they'd be close. You'd be hearing very positive reports saying, yep, it's not done yet, but it's getting close. We should be done soon. And that's not the reports. All the reports indicate that they're nowhere close. I mean, Elliot Friedman on this 32 Thoughts podcast, again, today said the same thing, and he's hearing that it's absolutely not close. So if they're looking to get him at 9 or less, and he wants, over 10, that's a huge problem. So clearly that could lead to the Leafs exploring a trade. Now, a couple things here that we don't know. One, how is Matthews going to feel about this? Is this going to impact the Matthews negotiation, or is Matthews going to understand that, they need to have this flexibility to make the team better? It's just that simple. If you really are all about winning, then that's how you have to look at things. But at the end of the day, the other big thing to look at as well, if Nylander's camp is insisting on over $10 million and is looking at the Marner contract and saying, we're pretty close to what they're doing as far as production and everything goes, I want similar money to Marner. At the end of the day here, it's okay. If the Leafs say, we can't do that, we're going to have to trade him. What other team is going to give William Nylander $10 million? The other thing is, now that he's going to have a modified no-trade clause, he's going to be able to block a bunch of teams that he can be traded to. So you would think he would probably block a lot of teams that he would consider less desirable. Unfortunately, the teams that have any amount of flexibility in cap space are teams that are coming out of a rebuild or going through a rebuild right now, they would be the teams that would have the money to pay him this kind of dough to work for them. And do you honestly think that's going to be teams he's going to want to go to? I would say no. I mean, what team that would be a solid playoff contender or cup contender would have any kind of flexibility to pay William Nylander $10 million? Like, look around the league. It's not, I can't come up with an example. Now, teams would have to trade a bunch of money out to the Leafs. Now, the only way it could possibly work is if another team is willing to pay him that kind of money, but move out multiple players to the Leafs, making a total similar amount. Let's say maybe Toronto gets 2 or 3 players totaling $10 million from the other club, then maybe it works. But then the other team is going to be handcuffed like the Leafs are now. So it's really difficult to say where the leverage goes right now. I mean, obviously we know Nylander's camp. They have a history of not backing down, of wanting what they want and not stopping till they get it. And, the Leafs do have to put their foot down at some point with some of these players and be like, okay, listen, like, enough's enough. If we're going to be able to win as a group, this is what we have to do and stick to their guns here. Now, that never happened with Dubas running the show. We'll see if Brad Treliving can get something done. But, I mean, if you look at in the past where William Nylander's been linked to, I know one team that was always expressed interest that anytime his name has been mentioned before was Carolina. It clearly needs a game-breaking, top-scoring kind of forward. I don't see them paying him $10 million, but I can see them having heavy interest in his services for sure if it came down to a trade. But again, like I said, I don't see them paying him. Calgary might be a team, maybe. He does have a connection to Calgary. I don't know if he still has family there or not, but his dad has history there. He was born there. Obviously grew up mostly in Sweden, but still knows the city well on the shore. The Flames are a team that's kind of going through a lot of changes right now. Maybe they move out a couple of players and create the space. That's a possibility. But again, really difficult to say if they could pull it off and make Toronto happy in a trade. It's going to be a case where Toronto might refuse to pay what he wants. They might want to talk about trading him, but then if they're going to do any kind of a sign-and trade, who's going to give him what he wants? It's just going to go back and forth. And it just right now, this has a bad vibe around it that could really drag out to what had happened before on his last contract. And if it does, it's just going to hurt the relationship between he and the team. And he and his agent may not have any choice but to accept less money and to take a trade somewhere else. But it's not going to be easy. Like, I keep hearing Nylander trade, but where's he going to go? Who's going to pay him $10 million? I'm not convinced anybody would, but, we'll see what happens. Let me know your thoughts on William Nylander and the Maple Leafs. Will they get a deal done? Will they pay him what he wants? Are they going to remain in this cap jam in Toronto, or will they end up having negotiations lead all this down to a trade after, a failed attempt to get an extension in place? Let me know your thoughts on that down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.